Stream is transitioning over. Give me 1 second.
Hi.
Hello. All right. Stream is transitioning over. We can go ahead and get started. This is issue 220, call 65, I believe. All right, we'll go through client updates, then we'll discuss Altair. There is a breaking change being discussed, which I'd like to get a little bit of input on. Then we will switch over to talk about an Eth2.0 withdrawal credentials proposal, and then do the regular call for research updates, spec updates, and other things. Let's go ahead and get started. We can start today with Lodestar.
Hello, everyone. So we're passing the Alpha 5 spec tests, working on getting to Alpha 6, but we want to get the preset config split stuff finished first. So we're also working on that. Other than that, we're working on Altair interop by syncing to the Teku devnets. And that's been really helpful. We fixed a bunch of Altair performance issues, and we're currently syncing to the head of the recent one.
Cool. Thank you. Let's do Prism.
Hey guys, Raul from Prismatic Labs here. Yeah, we have a few things, quite a lot of work done on Altair. So a lot of networking, transition work is being done, significant updates on that front. And for us, it seems like end of this month will be good for multi-client testnets. We're still ironing out a lot of things. We're passing spec tests. And aside from that, our team has also been looking into sharding work, trying to really just trying to understand kind of where we can be most impactful on that front. And yeah, aside from that, still working on aligning to the Eth2 APIs effort. That's been one of the biggest engineering challenges for us. It's been spanning many months for now, but we're close to the finish line on that front. And yeah, just chugging along. Thanks, guys.
Great, thank you. Teku.
Yep. Hey, everyone. So we finished implementing the Altair REST APIs, and we now have remote validation working on Altair. All the outstanding Eth2 REST API PRs have merged. We updated Teku to ingest the new config file format. For backwards compatibility, we have the git spec REST API endpoint, including the constants that have been removed from the new config. We're just manually injecting this for now. We removed our Java BLS library. It's too slow to be useful at this point. We have been working on updating our ETH1 tracking to fix an issue discovered through Rayonism. We had been using a static follow distance and instead need to calculate follow distance based on timestamp. That fix is implemented, but it's toggled off for now as we need to do some more real world testing. And finally, DevNets. We launched a couple of DevNets to test the Altair transition. I won't try and pronounce them. Through that, we found a few issues in Teku. We're not publishing updated ENRs correctly. And we had a bug in our transition logic, which caused us to produce an invalid chain on the first DevNet. The transition bug is fixed, and we're still looking into the issue with ENR publishing. On the current DevNet, we're seeing some issues with sync committee gossip that need to be tracked down. We'll likely keep that current DevNet up for a while so we can get to the bottom of networking issues. If any other teams would like to join that DevNet and you need validator keys, you can reach out to Adrian and he'll get you set up. And that's it for us.
Great. Yeah, thanks for putting those DevNets up. I think it's a great way to get started. Nimbus.
All right. Am I on? All right. We started work on Altair a bit late because we were focused on the merge recently. But now our focus is entirely on Altair, and just like Prism, we hope to be ready for the first testnet at the end of this month. In other news, our REST API is probably will be coming out of beta soon. We've addressed a lot of feedback from end users for smaller incompatibilities. We are finally introducing the use of multi-cores in Nimbus, and so far we will be focusing only on BOST verifications. But since the majority of CPU usage in a client is via verification of attestation signatures, we hope that this would be enough to take advantage of all cores and without changing the architecture of Nimbus in any other way.
Very nice. Remind me, are you doing any sort of batching on the wire when attestations are coming in for batch verification?
Yes, we've introduced a special form of batching, which we bundle the incoming attestation into groups, which could mean either 16 attestations arrive in a short interval of time, which is 10 milliseconds, or these 10 milliseconds elapse, and we verify the number of attestations that were received during the time. But usually these bunches are grouped. We receive many more attestations than 16 in this time frame. So that's the granularity that we do right now.
Gotcha.
If any of the attestations, obviously the problem here is that if any of the signatures is invalid, you have to verify each individual attestation again, which is the potential cost if somebody is attacking the network. But we believe that the trade-off is worth doing.
Gotcha. Great, thank you. And Lighthouse.
Hello, everyone. So we have got our Altair implementation syncing and following the chain with Eth2 and perhaps Lodestar, I'm not sure. So once again, big thanks to Eth2 for doing the legwork on setting that testnet up. We're presently on spec alpha 6 and we're passing the new config format, and we have backwards compatibility to the old format. Loosely speaking, we have all the features required for Altair implemented, but now we're working on updating some components to alpha 6, namely our sync committee caches, and we also need to get everything reviewed and merged into our primary branch. Presently, we're doing interop with a branch that's merges together a few work in progress PRs. So we're doing interop on the branch with work in progress PRs. No doubt as well, we've got some Altair issues that we don't know about yet that we'll have to deal with. We've done today a pre-release for the first time. So we've done a bunch of outgoing comms to users to tell them not to run it on mainnet and explain what we're doing with it. If there's any power users on this call that are running Lighthouse, I'd suggest giving it a run on testnets. There's some good memory improvements, and we'd like to see how they run on lots of different hardware. And finally, we're expecting to publish a release next week, assuming that the pre-release goes well. So this is not the full feature set we'd announced previously, but it is earlier than we'd initially announced for that release. So we're just going to split up the features into two releases, and we're expecting to have the rest of the features, including Doppelganger and Altair, in a release later this month. And that's it from us.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on to Altair discussion. It sounds like engineering progress is moving along. Thanks again for setting up those dev nets. I think that's a great way to start. Just get some interop in place. We did patch the test vectors yesterday for Alpha 6. There were a couple that were incorrect, and then I accidentally, there were a couple that were missing, but the TARs on that release should be good and complete and correct at this point. We are targeting an Alpha 7 tomorrow, pending discussion of this feature. So I'd like to shift discussion into that. I don't think Pota's joined us, but Pota's identified that essentially how the sync rewards worked. It created a pretty asymmetricness in rewards that could be unfair based off of how you win the lottery or not. As in, if you get selected for the sync committee, you see something like a 15% boost in your rewards, and if you don't, which could happen to a not insignificant amount over the course of like a year and a half, you forego those rewards. So there are 2 PRs up. I only linked to one. My apologies. One has essentially shifts the entirety of the sync rewards to be a penalty. So essentially by default, you do get all of these rewards. And if then when you are in that sync committee, you don't perform well, you get a penalty, reducing the lottery effect or eliminating the lottery effect in the positive direction. And then Vitalik has an alternative, which is 2453, which modifies some of the logic, reduces the penalties, reduces the magnitude of the effect of this reward, and has not only a reward but also a penalty for non-participation, in effect reducing the magnitude of the effect of the lottery to something like 3% rather than 15%. I think it also, Vitalik noted in this PR, that the sync committee being as valuable in the long run as proposing was probably not a good call anyway, so both of these should probably reduce the magnitude of the sync committee reward. There's 2 questions here. One would be the fact that this is a breaking change and it would need to be introduced very soon. It's very small. Test vectors would be rerun and get good coverage on this thing, but it is breaking nonetheless. And the other is the balance between these 2. I think some have signaled that they're into Vitalik's, but there's also the argument for Potez. Vitalik, can you make the argument for your PR?
Sure. I think the 2 approaches is that people hearing me okay?
Not great.
Okay. Are you hearing me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, so basically the way to think about it is like status quo, +1 if you participate, 0 if you don't participate. Potez's proposal, 0 if you participate, -1 if you don't participate, and my proposal is +0.5 if you participate, -0.5 if you don't participate. So the 2 biggest arguments in favor of mine were, one is that if you do pure penalties and no rewards, then this introduces the first proposer reward that is not directly computed as a multiple of rewards for things that it includes. And so that breaks the invariant that we currently have about how proposer rewards are calculated, which is like, it's not fatal, but it does just like will make it continually harder to make sure that incentives or that rewards add up to 1 in the future. And the second one is also that we've historically had a goal of not wanting innocent people to lose a lot of money, and if there is like during situations like validator leaks, and if there is an inequity, then like if you do the kind of +0 -1 thing, then the like basically if half the validators are offline, then half the next slot proposers will be missing, and that means that like basically you will, like if you are part of the committee at that time, you will lose quite a bit. And then the second, but then if you have +0.5 and -0.5, then you like being in a sync committee only becomes a net negative if more than 50% of participants are missing, and even then it's a much smaller net negative. Oh, I saw Pota's replied in the Discord for that, like proposers get rewarded by what they include. I guess just like clarifying, what I mean is that like if you do the +0 like right now, right? If you include like proposers' entire rewards comes from the idea that like if you include a message that causes someone else to get +X, then proposers would get plus x over 7, right? Whereas if you do the +0 -1 thing, then like you'd have to give proposers like some reward, but that reward would not be any kind of plus x over 7. It would be like plus something else over 7. So
question on the penalty mechanism here. This is only, these rewards are only run in process sync committee, which are only run if there is a block. And so in the event that there is no block, no one gets a reward, no one gets penalized in both proposals, correct?
Oh, good. That's a good point. I think no, the challenge is like, what if there oh, I see. Actually, I don't think I even thought about that consideration. That makes things even weirder to like for the especially for the more like a penalty-based approach, because that basically means that like you can gain by knocking proposers offline, which is generally the sort of thing that we try to prevent. So I guess that would even be a different argument in favor of keeping the penalties milder.
It's right. You can either do your job or you can DOS the proposers. But your job is also entangled with getting blocks online with attestation, so the incentive to DOS is probably actually extremely minimal. But no, because that
actually
Potas
was saying in the Discord that he's saying the penalty computation is not correct. Then I guess like I don't know, Potas, do you want to reply again? I guess I'm a bit confused. Like, is my characterization?
I think. Thank you, Adrian. You just send me the link. I can reply, Vitalik, if you let me on the penalty thing. So the way that PR works is you get the reward and you don't really get a penalty. You just lose that reward if you just don't participate in that particular slot. So the worst thing that can happen to a validator that is not participating on my PR is exactly what would happen now as it is in the specs. So it's not really getting a minus
but
one.
Then hold on, but then I'm confused. That how does that address the lottery issue?
Because everyone gets by default the sync reward up front, and if you're not participating in it, you just take it back from it. So it's not really a 0 - 1. In your PR, actually, it is an actual penalty. In your PR, if you don't.
Oh, I see. Wait, so you're saying. Now. Oh, so you're saying, hold on, that in your. I guess so. You made a new approach then. That's like okay. So you're saying in this new approach that the SIG committee reward is just always given by default, given to everyone, and it's even given to people who are not part of the SIG committee, so it doesn't get like modified by a probability factor. Exactly. And then if you, I see, okay.
And then the proposer does get penalized if it doesn't include a sync reward. So
right, I see.
It's still included that issue.
But then does this not make the incentive to participate in sync committees and the incentive to include sync committee signatures fairly tiny?
No, well, so the proposer gets a reward according to how much he includes. So 1 over 7 is still part of the proposal. So
okay, I get, but it's 1 over
7.
But it's 1 over 7 of something much smaller, right? Like if there's like basically, like let's say for example, there's 10,000 validators and there's 100 sync committee members, then what we're saying, like, well, the status quo, right, is that if you're in a sync committee and you get included, then you get plus 100, and if you don't get included, you get 0, and then everyone else gets 0. But your proposal would be saying, if you're not in the sync committee, you get plus 1, and if you're in the sync committee and you propose, you get plus 1, and if you're in this, or if you're in the sync committee and you participate, you get plus 1. If you're in the sync committee and you don't participate, you get plus 0, right? Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah.
So the
correct.
incentive does. So the incentive to participate in the SIG committee does go down from being +100 to being +1.
Yes, that it is true. That's true. So
Okay.
for participants, the incentive goes down.
Hmm.
You can,
Right.
however, you can make the penalty independent in that PR. So you can actually increase the penalty quite a bit so that it actually becomes negative without changing the proposal mechanism.
I see. Okay, but then the proposer reward in your proposal, is it +1 times 1/7, or is it like?
It's exactly as it is now. It's exactly the same thing, the same numbers as it is now, I think.
Okay,
The
but
same
okay.
proportion.
Well, so like for example, let's say 80% of people in the SIG committee get a reward, right? Or participate. Then like there would be 80 people that get +1, and then there would be there will be 9,900 other people that get +1, and then 20 people that get +0. Would the proposer reward be 99.8% of the maximum, or would it be 80% of the maximum?
It'll be 80% of the maximum.
Okay, I see. Right. So that's still, I guess, a bit decoupled from rewards, but I guess it's decoupled in a less harmful way. Yeah, no, I see the proposal. I guess yeah, my main concern is just that like if you do like you are cutting down the reward by a factor of 100, and like cutting down the reward by the factor of or cutting down the incentive by a factor of 2 seems reasonable, but cutting down the incentive by a factor of 100, or like realistically it's much more than 100, is feels a bit on the risky side. Like as a client developer, for example, or as for example, right? Like if I make a custom client and I just like never bother to write SIG committee code, then I would still get like over 99% of the, or 99.9+% of the rewards, which, so you could fix that with penalties, but then we're back to having penalties.
But just a second on the incentive part. So if you're a client, if you're already, say that you already are in the lottery and you are in the committee, and then given that conditional probability, you're now evaluating whether or not you should include or not your signature. So given that conditional probability that you're already in the committee, I think my proposal doesn't change anything, right? Because you lose the exact same that you would gain by participating.
Well, no, like status quo is that conditional on being on the committee, it's like it's +100 versus +0, but here you're saying it's +1 versus +0.
No, I think so. Currently, if you're not participating in one slot, you do not get that reward for that slot, and it's exactly the same reward that you would get for the penalty. So in my situation, it's exactly the same. If you do not participate in that slot, you just get a penalty for what you would have gotten for that reward. So it's exactly the same in that sense. I don't see that difference.
But no, but like but like it's still like it's like you get like
is your penalty
what I mean by
same
like
magnitude?
+100 +0.
The question is that penalty the same magnitude as the reward is now?
Yes. So currently it's set up that way, but it's independent. So you can just change that parameter and make it harsher if you wish, and then the incentive is going to be even larger.
So that means actually your proposal is something like +1 for participation and -99 for as a penalty.
Well, so you only get penalized
except
on the
that the
slot
+1 also applies when you're not even in the subcommittee.
Right, that's correct, but I don't see why the -99 analogy. So this the penalty only applies when you don't participate in that slot.
Exactly.
No, we understand that. But I think Vitalik's question is, I think Vitalik understood it as the penalty. Like you get this very small reward every slot. Like that's 100 times smaller than it is now, because right now, like we have this huge reward when you are in the steering committee, but none when you're outside of it. So you're making that much smaller, and you give it always. And I think Vitalik understood that the penalty is just the negative of this tiny reward. But I understand you now as saying that the penalty is actually much, much larger. Like it's actually the same magnitude as the reward is now.
Per slot, that's correct.
Okay, so
And
then
basically 100 is our number for what the reward is now. So
right.
that's why we say minus 99 for your penalty.
Right, but then in that case, so if the proposal is +1 minus 99, then the problem that like to a sync committee during an inactivity leak, you're going to lose a lot still applies, right?
I think so, but I think you will lose what you already gained. So you lose less than in your PR. In your PR, if you do not participate, you actually have a negative income. In mine,
right.
Yeah, but
it's
why
like,
do you just get zero? No, you still get a large penalty.
Well, no,
right,
but the
if
penalty
just
just
get
takes
zero,
away whatever you already got.
So you just
right,
get like
wait, so you're
on
saying
average you get zero. You're just proposing basically your proposal is equivalent to saying we have a universal basic income for all validators, no matter what they do, and then we add a large penalty if you don't participate in the sync committee, which is exactly equivalent to taking on average to taking that universal basic income away.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But if the penalty is just taking the reward away, then it is +1 + 0 and not +1 minus 99. Right. So that still means that the incentive is small. Yeah.
No, the incentive is large in this proposal.
Well, no, but like
the problem
okay,
is
so
now you have the inverse lottery now. Like basically before you had the lottery that you can be lucky, you can gain lots. And now we have like a death lottery, like you can be unlucky and be selected exactly when
when it's a leak. That I agree that it's an inverse lottery, but that inverse lottery in general would only apply for a very tiny set of validators. So it's not only that you have only 512,
it's still kind of
offline and that particular slot versus a lottery that affects everyone.
But you can just be unlucky, and that can feel pretty horrible. I mean, that's just I think all
that is true.
That this is about. Like the psychology of it is very.
No, but the other way, everyone is unlucky. That's the point. So the way that on Vitalik's now, which actually Vitalik's PR reduces a lot the variances, but even computing with those numbers, you see that you get 17%, almost 18% of validators will be over 4 times in a committee in 2 years. And only 11% of validators will not be in any committee in 2 years. So that's a 15% of the rewards difference between those two.
The other possibility is to just make the committees larger overall. Like just even if we don't currently foresee anyone using it, we could just make them 10 times larger and say like, well, just we have a lot more validators in there, and that reduces the variance.
Right, but does that mean that we're bringing back the aggregate public key? Does that mean we have to like change things? Yeah, like that. That feels like a starter. So like it does feel to me like there's this kind of fundamental trade-off that either there's a lottery or there's an anti-lottery, and I think if just the lottery, or if it down to 0, then like during a leak fee in the anti-lottery becomes pretty severe, and like that's at least a violation of a property we've been trying to uphold. But then on the other hand,
I mean, maybe also like the other thing is after the merge, we'll probably have a much bigger issue than this lottery with the MEV lottery. So it's not clear that we're gaining that much by over-optimizing this now.
Right.
Like, I mean, I guess like it's good to avoid lotteries, but maybe this problem is tiny to what we're going to inherit in a bit, and like this kind of feels a bit,
Right. So the merge lottery, the post-merge lottery would be like you get elected as a proposer at the same time that there just happens to be like an unusually large market movement.
Yeah.
And that's totally the sort of thing that you can get lucky in over the course. Like, easily bigger than the same committee. Actually, we could quickly look at the.
You're breaking up pretty
Sorry,
bad.
can't hear you.
Sorry, I was saying, like, we can calculate the size of the sync committee lottery, like it's something like once a year for a day, or once you gain the equivalent of, what was it, something like 1.5 weeks of revenue, and 1.5 weeks of revenue for a single validator is going to be what, like something like 2 ETH multiplied by 3%, so something like 0.06, maybe 0.1 ETH. So I could easily see that being much smaller than MEV lotteries.
Yeah, one block can probably net you like, yeah, more than an ETH even. I mean, I guess like, yeah. We need to fix those as well, obviously, in some way, but.
I agree, but like I feel like with MEV, we're never going to fix 100%, and like there's always going to be very unusual market crunches.
Yeah.
We are happy to implement either of those two. In terms of complexity, it's fine, not a problem for us.
Yep, same here.
So how do we
Yeah,
proceed?
I'd agree with that. I guess the one concern I have is that we're struggling to come to a decision. So I guess to take a step back, the other question to ask is, if we don't fix this before Altair, how much of a problem is it, and how soon? So if it waited till next fork and we picked one of these two solutions and implemented it, is that a problem? Or it probably is 2 forks away given the merge is next.
Right. I mean, I think probably for one, the constant is too high to begin with. That's an easy fix. And then I think it would be better to put one of these in than not, but not catastrophic if we let it go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other variant of that is to say, well, let's just pick one practically randomly. We don't have to fully agree on it. Just pick either, put it in, and then we can continue the argument and change the other if we need to. There's a reason.
To me, after this discussion, it feels like the plus 0.5 minus 0.5 variant is the best because it minimizes variance across all the ones. It's only a 0.5 reduction variance, but that's better than nothing. So I would just go for that one.
Does anyone else feel strongly one way or the other? Okay.
So is that we're going for the plus 0.5 minus 0.5, or?
I would like to do that because I think it's reasonable and it's simple. And it generally achieves our goals. Okay, we're gonna do a final review on that PR and likely merge it today and get out in Alpha 7. Altair planning. Generally, it sounds like people are willing and able to target something more substantial than these short-lived DevNets. End of June, maybe first week of July. So I think Proto, Xiaowei, and myself will put some work into planning something, getting some configuration parameters and some timing in place to plan something a little bit more coordinated than the short-lived testnets. But I would encourage maybe Adrian to stand up an Alpha 7 version of what he did this past week. I think that was really valuable in the meantime to kind of sanity check things and get things in place. And then from there, let's see, in the next 2 weeks, we will pick maybe a date and a set of parameters for an initial more coordinated testnet. Cool. Assuming that goes well, assuming we get some fuzzing action going, and assuming we continue to enhance the tests, that would be a positive signal to move towards picking upgrade dates on our existing 2 testnets, probably doing another testnet in the meantime, and then looking towards mainnet. I think the big unknown, it sounds like, with client teams right now is, sure, the bones and things are in place, the tests are passing, but we want to get some more time to sit with it, more time to do testing, more time to iron out the bugs on these testnets. So security is certainly a priority, and we will make informed decisions over the next few weeks.
Quick question. Is Alpha 7 expected to be the final spec change, at least in terms of consensus code?
Yes. Alpha 6 was also the expected final spec change before POTOS identified that kind of asymmetric issue with rewards. So yes, it is the intention. Unless something serious with security is identified, it will be stable.
Sweet, thanks.
What about the state root change?
What's the state of that conversation?
I think there's kind of agreement it's useful. There is one contention point, which is the backfilling, which is considered complex for some clients. And the proposal is to make it into a 2-phase operation, so that on this fork, we make the change to the beacon state, and on the next fork, we backfill existing values as sort of a one-off operation.
So this is the alternative that meets the same need is essentially on the network side, serving batches of blocks along with a state root list root, right? And so defining a network format that gives you the extra little piece of data, which is 32 bytes, to be able to prove against the current items in state, right?
Sorry, can you ask again? I didn't really understand the question.
Yeah, so right now, what we want to do is be able to serve batches of blocks against the block root list. Right now, that is obfuscated in historical roots by combining those 2 lists. What that looks like from an SSZ proof, if I wanted to serve you the block roots, is I can give you, along with the block roots, a 32-byte root as a single proof. That 32-byte root is the root of the state root list for that batch, a historical batch. So if I define a network format that allows me to pass essentially a small proof, which is the 32-byte root, and the block roots, then I don't have to change the state, right?
I think it's the other way around. I think it's that once you do have a state, you have the ability to verify any batch of blocks, any 8K batch of blocks that you happen to have for the whole history of ETH, right? And then, so the idea is here, there are 2 use cases for this. The first one is weak subjectivity thing. So basically, the assumption here is that you're given a state that you already trust. And then with this change, you can quickly prove that any batch of blocks is part of that particular state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you receive that from the network or disk or wherever else, right? The other, I think the other nice feature about it is that it gives us this like natural identifier for a day's worth of blocks, and we can use that later on for archive purposes, and very easy to coordinate around these chunks of blocks. So again, for weak subjectivity sync, it becomes very easy to do sort of out-of-band transfers of these chunks of blocks. And then the final reason is obviously that if you want to create an archive node that serves, or really when you want to dig into the history of voting, for example, you can very easily prove that a particular block was part of a particular state that you're trying to work with.
Right. I guess I'm saying for a number of those use cases, say for weak subjectivity sync, where somebody's giving me batches of blocks, they can give me the batch of blocks along with a single 32-byte root, and I can prove it against what is currently in the state. So yeah, exactly. It goes from batch of blocks. Yeah.
Dogman, Sean, respect. See, bro.
I'm muting you, Doncred. So I'm just saying, if no change happened, you could define like a batch block format, which is essentially a batch of blocks and a small proof. Where in many of those cases, you could just pass those along rather than batches of blocks. I'm not saying that that's optimal. I'm just saying that if this didn't go in, that would be the alternative. What is the state of the PR with respect to testing? And okay, so the current state has historic batch summary. Yeah, I mean, at this point, we could introduce a breaking change because Alpha 7 is going to introduce a breaking change. Want to hear what other engineering teams think.
To be completely honest, from our end, we haven't been particularly across this one. I think we're pretty full with bandwidth, and just this one got left out. But we can look into it.
Yeah, same here. I haven't really studied the PR as well, so I'll probably have to look at it again and then get back to you guys.
Okay, so if we delay Alpha 7 until Wednesday, then we can make a call on this. Alpha 7 looks a lot like Alpha 6 as of now, so it's not adding like too much issue and complexity, but is that reasonable? Can I get people to take a look at this by end of Monday?
Yeah, totally. I like what the PR is delivering. I just can't make any calls on implementation at the moment.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is the backfill stuff. If we did it in 2 forks, I think it's simple to drop in. Yeah.
So if we don't do backfill, is this still useful?
Well, I think so. The thing for me is that I think we probably wind up with a 2 fork approach anyway, because it's the simplest way to do this. It's kind of where Eth1 landed on these kind of approaches a while back. So if we start building the new state now, then next fork we can do the backfill, and we're kind of where we are if we punt this and argue about how to backfill it and then wind up doing 2 forks, or even if we sort out backfill, it's going to push it into the next fork anyway. So I kind of think that we get the usefulness next fork pretty much regardless of how we do this. And there's a risk that it maybe becomes 2 forks away if we can't sort out the backfill before next fork.
I see. Is there a reason that you can't preset the backfill so that you do the backfill at the same fork? Or is it just kind of a compromise at this point because backfill's not ready?
It's probably doable. You'd have to get client releases out that add to the storage and kind of keep stuff around that we don't currently keep. But that kind of increases the engineering scope quite significantly over the change. We could probably do it, but it's a big change we're putting in late at that point.
Right. Oh, I wasn't saying necessarily doing it for this fork. I'm saying if the backfill was going to happen a fork later from now, and this isn't necessarily entirely useful without the backfill, then if you can batch both together and do it in next fork, then you've gotten the usefulness at the same point in time. I need to study the PR as well.
Yeah, I think backfill is likely to be workable if we have the time to do it well. That is probably preferable to shoving something in, especially if it doesn't have usage, if it's not particularly usable. But I'm happy to be told if it is used, like if building the state now starts to be usable sooner, then I think we could fit it in. I'll defer to Jacek on that.
It is usable in the sense that we can compute, we can actually compute the backfill a day before the fork. And if we think about it, we can actually ship that as a constant in clients way before the next fork. And that means that we could start using this feature right after the fork if we had it in there by shipping that backfill together with the client, you know, in the next client update after the fork.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like the contention point here is that, or the difficulty of doing a backfill is that you can only create a constant for up to, like there's only a day of data in the state, right? And then it's lost. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't ship a new version with the backfill already, because that's by that time historical information. So by doing the fork now, all the clients start recording this data in the state. If we do not do the fork, we will have to record the data out of state until the next fork, and then do the backfill, which, you know, for us, it doesn't really matter that much. We can easily attach stuff to the beacon state in our storage, but it does complicate implementation in general is the feedback. So I would say that it's useful to get it in now in this state, and it becomes useful immediately when clients make a release, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. I think that's a strong argument for me in favor of doing a 2-fork release regardless, because you can get the benefit very quickly. And it's just so much simpler and easier to test. You keep the property of one state and plus a block, and that's what you need, kind of thing, for the transition.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good compromise. I agree.
So let's study up on the PR. I definitely am worried about scope creep on Altair. Just I know that we're making a breaking change to the way sync committee rewards work in the next couple of days, but that's like a few lines, and most of the testing remains very stable, whereas this is kind of a larger unknown item at this point. And I just, given that we are delayed on Altair, and given that one of the reasons for Altair is just to do a warm-up fork, you know, I just want to caution digging deep into another feature. But I'd like
the engineering teams to take a look at it. Line number. Oh, sorry.
You're good.
Yeah, just don't let the line numbers scare you. it's mostly renames. As Proto mentioned in his comment, the actual change is one line, 2 lines, one in the beacon state and one in the historical batch calculation function. So we already calculate all this data in the current version of the client. It's just that instead of storing 1 root, we'll be storing 2.
Right, I understand.
Not trying to poo-poo this idea, but it does add work in terms of for us in terms of storing this stuff in our database. Like we have to spread that thing out in our frozen database and stuff like that. I don't think we can just copy the existing code we have, but there is just some changes there that are more than just the lines in the spec.
I think so, even though I like the way we can minimize the spec changes, that we should really take the backfill serious. I'm also worried about scope creep.
Do you mean take it seriously as in don't do it in a 2-fork solution?
I mean, we'll have to test the 2-fork solution. We have to document the 2-fork solution. And it all has to happen in parallel to the already delayed fork.
Got it.
Meaning, don't put this feature in unless you figured out what the second fork looks like, which takes more time and effort at this point. Okay, we are not quite running late, but let's continue. Continue conversation on Altair in the next few days on that PR. OX02 credentials, the author of that is here. Would you like to give us a quick update on that, or a quick TLDR on that?
Sure. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm Joe Klappis. I'm joined by Darren Langley. We're from the Rocket Pool team. We've been paying attention to the merge pretty closely, as you might expect, and we're really excited to see Nocturne working, but we did notice a problem with it. So I don't want to assume everybody has read that pull request, so I'm just going to summarize it really quickly here, discuss our proposed solution in that PR, and then we'll go from there once that context has been set. So right now there exist cases where a validator isn't owned entirely by one party, or it's not owned by the party that's running the consensus client or the execution client. And in those cases, we still submit that the owners of that validator should be entitled to their fair share of all of the rewards that are generated by validation duties. Now, the OX01 withdrawal prefix solves this problem for block proposals and for attestation rewards by sending them to an address on ETH1 during a withdrawal. And that address can be a smart contract that handles the distribution logic appropriately. But with the current merge approach, priority fees for transactions that are included in blocks are sent to the block's Coinbase address, which is set by the execution client owner as a command line argument. It's not controlled by the validator owners. So there's a decoupling there. This is a problem because the execution client owner can take all of those priority fees for themselves by simply setting that Coinbase to an address they control and not distribute those rewards to the validator owners. This is a problem because the execution client owner, they take all of those fees and the validator owners don't get a fair share of those rewards. That's kind of the issue here. So in a decentralized staking context, we can't force a node operator to share with the rest of the pool, for example, by setting that Coinbase to a splitter contract that handles the delegation appropriately. If those node operators behave selfishly and they pocket those fees, it means the overall return is diminished for the stakers that invested in that validator but that don't own the execution client, which means decentralized staking solutions based on this model don't really have an equal footing compared to the other platforms. They're less viable. So that is, in a nutshell, that's the TLDR of the problem. Now, a solution to that problem has to fix 4 criteria that we've come up with. Number 1, it has to allow for fair distribution of the priority fees to everybody sort of invested in that validator. Number 2, it has to scale to arbitrary balances. And this is one of the sticking points with us, because if you go via a punishment model, for example, where you withhold the initial investment into a validator that the node operator made, you can only punish them up to that investment. You can't punish them beyond it, whereas somebody that abuses this mechanism could accumulate rewards beyond that. So that punishment model doesn't really scale. We need something that would. Number 3, we need something that doesn't interfere with existing validators on mainnet today that use the OXO or the OX1 prefixes. And based on some discussion we had in the R&D Discord, it turns out there's actually 3,200 validators on mainnet right now that are using OX1 as a prefix, and they didn't sign up for any of the changes that need to be made to support a solution to this problem, and we don't want to enforce those on them. So we need something that doesn't interfere with all of the other validators today. And then finally, number 4 is we want something that doesn't really add any appreciable burden to the merge. I mean, as we've heard today, it's already gone through some delays, and we don't want to further exacerbate that problem. So with those 4 criteria in context, we started looking for a solution internally with the Rocket Pool protocol itself. And we couldn't find one that fits all 4 of those criteria. The problem really ends up being scaling, those being able to steal arbitrary rewards in perpetuity. This needs to be addressed at the consensus protocol level. That's kind of the decision that we came down to. So we workshopped this with a couple of the core devs in the R&D Discord, and we came up with a potential solution, which is where OXO2, the withdrawal credential prefix, comes into play. So this is a new prefix. It is an extension of OXO1 in that it also specifies an ETH1 address to withdraw to when the time comes and the validator exits, but it comes with an additional condition, which is that blocks proposed by OXO2 validators are only valid if the Coinbase for that block is equal to the withdrawal address set in the withdrawal credentials. Now, Mikhail wrote some sample code in our PR for that. It looks promising. It's actually a pretty light change. And you'd think that this issue would have some implications for Coinbase logic for the execution client as well, especially in the case of a light client provider like Infura, for example. But his code addresses that problem too. So this proposal has benefits not just for Rocket Pool, but also for other users beyond Rocket Pool. For example, block staking could provisionally use this, so they don't need to internally manage a map of the Coinbase rewards that they earn to the withdrawal addresses for all of their clients. And that's something that they've specified they would like to investigate. So at the end of the day, that's not the only solution. It is a promising one, but it's not the only one. It's just the current mechanics disincentivize decentralized staking in Ethereum. And we are simply looking for some solution that levels the playing field for all the platforms. So in a nutshell, that's what the PR is about and what it tries to solve.
Right, thank you. So for one, I don't think we're going to come to a solution on this call, but I do think this is good educational context for everybody. Personally, I'm not, I do see the problem. I think the naive solution of like fraud proofs or something that could burn somebody's capital does, as you pointed out, have a limitation on how much can be burned or taken. And especially if the withdrawal credentials cannot initiate exits, say from smart contracts, then they can kind of hold on to that capital, the validation capital, forever. So there are problems there. OXO1 was put in place as a compromise because it required no consensus changes to support and just a future promise. The OXO2, for it to actually be enforced at the point of merge, would require some line changes to the merge, and so does kind of encumber that process a bit more. And so that's, I mean, ultimately it ends up being like a feature request on top of trying to do the merge at the same time, which in general we've been attempting to avoid. There are two potential paths there. One would be to avoid that would be to not define OXO2 until after the merge, which I'm sure people that want to use it would not necessarily like. And then the other alternative is that there is a time between the merge and when OXO2 is actually forked in, where you can be using OXO2, but you don't actually get the guarantee of the enforcement, and the enforcement could be forked in later. Again, I don't, given that this call is primarily focused on Altair and shipping that, I don't think we're going to get too far into this, but I'd be curious if you had any response to that, or if anybody else has any input or discussion.
Quick question: why not just fork this in for the OXO1 addresses? That seems to make more sense to me, because
there's 3,200.
It is their funds.
Yeah. Because it's an unknown implication for the logic change for people that are using OXO1. But I suppose the setting of Coinbase was already an unknown introduction to that, so you could argue both ways probably.
I don't know. I mean, I would disagree. I mean, my assumption is that the withdrawal address is owner of the funds, and whatever you get as a return on block rewards is actually part of those funds. Like, I actually think, like, I mean, it's even a question why, shouldn't the Coinbase be signed by the withdrawal key in case it's a BLS key as well? I don't know. I mean, there are, questions about that, because this kind of goes against the spirit of the purpose of the keys if we don't do any kind of
right. So you're saying the issue exists with
enforce any kind of alignment there.
The issue exists with OXO already as well.
Yeah, I think so, because like, I mean, I might have given someone like I might have contracted someone to like stake for me, and I keep the withdrawal keys. And now suddenly it changes, and they can, like, before the only way they could extract value was kind of like extortion and racket, but now they can just propose blocks for their own ETH1 address.
I guess the other way of looking at that is that it would have been perfectly reasonable to pay the inclusion fees to the validator balance, which would then put it under the control of the withdrawal key. So it's not over the top.
That was one of the solutions we looked at originally, and we decided to not go down that route because it adds an extra synchronization portion between the execution layer and the consensus layer. In this case, because the withdrawal address is already on ETH1, it doesn't end up mattering here.
Yeah, I don't mean we would actually do it. I'm just logically, if it were paid there, that would seem quite reasonable, and that has the same net effect as requiring the Coinbase to be the same as your OX1 address.
Right.
It does. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm gonna say pretty much the exact opposite of what I just said. I just realized that it doesn't make sense, because there's like the only thing that the Coinbase address receives after 1559 is the tip, and actually a tip can also easily be paid out of bands. So this is like this kind of, I mean, I agree that it should be going to the validator owner, but there's actually no ways to force it. Like if we make this kind of change, then you can still easily like get someone to pay you out of bands for the transaction. Just keep that money.
That's
right.
true.
This doesn't solve side channel problems, and it's not intended to solve those.
And it doesn't solve MEV as well. Like that can go to any address.
So it doesn't. It's
right.
not.
Tip is part of MEV.
It's not intended to solve MEV, although if I understand right, the way Flashbots works right now, for example, is they use the Coinbase to do that distribution. So it might provisionally help there as long as you play along. But again, this isn't intended to solve the side channel problem. And I would submit that ignoring it because side channel exists isn't very fair, because this problem still exists for honest node operators.
But
Right.
they're not necessarily acting honest if they put a different Coinbase in, right? If that's part of your like agreement.
Yeah, and there's also people who don't know how to run MEV, but can still leverage this mechanism.
So I worry that by making it financially more profitable to accept transactions over a side channel makes the situation worse, because basically you're saying, hey, I'm about to produce a block. If you pay me over the side channel, I'm willing to work for less because I get 100% of that. And if you pay me, if I have to pull a transaction out of Gossip, that ends up going to someone else. So I'm just going to ignore Gossip transactions because that gets distributed to 100 other people. And so then we're kind of creating an incentive where we're saying, hey, it's cheaper to send transactions over the side channel because miners or block producers rather get to keep the whole thing. Like whoever actually creates that block, whoever's running that execution client gets all of the side channel stuff, and they get a very small percentage of the Gossiped tip transactions. And so I worry that we're actually disincentivizing good behavior of transaction submission and block producers in other ways by kind of encouraging side channel work.
It's definitely a related part of the problem. Yeah. And perhaps an entire solution needs to account for both the Coinbase issue we've highlighted and side channels.
I mean, that would be great.
We don't have any solution to the side channels right now. We just have a solution at the Coinbase problem.
Yeah, my worry is that I think the side channel problem is insurmountable because you can always do side channel payments. It's like as long as you're not required to pay the miner, like it's entirely optional, like the tip for 1559 is, then you can pay them in whatever way you want. Like ultimately, it's the block producer that gets to decide the transaction order and what's included, and that's like getting out of that is a really hard problem. And I'm concerned that solving half of it just makes it worse.
Mikhail?
I just wanted to add, if we enforce this logic for 0x01, then we are removing the option of changing the Coinbase. So it will be the same address because we don't have a way to change the withdrawal credentials on the beacon chain. So that's to consider if we go this road. Yeah, and also if we don't, and if we don't want to like put extra complexity to the merge, to the point of merge, and we will likely enable this logic after the merge if we decide to. So there will be a period of time where Coinbase will be configured as it is now in the mainnet, and then we change the behavior already that the users are used to have for 0x01, and that's probably be an issue for them, for users. So that's why the new prefix makes sense.
Okay. This PR is up for continued discussion. I think that at least everyone has a good introduction to the problem at hand. I do want to reiterate that.
Can you link that?
Yeah, we'll do. The I do tend to think that half solving side channel problem actually does exacerbate the side channel problem, or half solving the Coinbase problem. Okay. I don't think that we need to make a decision at this point, but I do think that if you are interested in chiming in, please jump into 2454. And I also believe people are conversing about this in the withdrawal credentials chat on the ETH-R&D Discord. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay, longer meeting than usual. Let's wrap things up. Any research updates today? Great. And any other spec discussion beyond what we've been discussing in the Altair context? Additionally, if you weren't on the merge call this morning, there is a merge PR up for transition total difficulty and dynamically calculating that at the point of fork. Check that out. Okay, any other discussion points or closing remarks? Great. Okay, we will close for today. Appreciate it. We'll jump on a call in 2 weeks. Plenty of Altair progress and fun between now and then. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.